You're listening to Let's Talk Jobs, where we give you practical insights into jobs and careers. Today, we're joined by Sarah Burley and Gareth Strange. How are you guys doing?
Good, thanks, Tim.
Very well.
Cool. All right, so I worked with you at a previous company, in everything around the topic of brand. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing today?
Well, today is a bank holiday in the UK, so we're in true kind of working for yourself style, trying to catch up and hit some deadlines today. And we're going away with work next week, actually. So we're sort of working towards that. So it's
Cool.
it's a lot of fun.
Cool. So you and we got introduced to each other at a previous company, when you're an agency and you're dealing with everything brand. Can you tell us a little bit about John and Jane and what your roles are?
Yeah, sure. So John and Jane is a tiny design and branding studio in Wales. We started it 7.5 years ago now. So the name John and Jane is basically us two. It's our middle names, but it was also a concept around kind of wanting to put the work first and let the names take a back seat, kind of like slightly linked to John and Jane Doe. But yeah, we set up 7.5 years ago to do branding, design, strategy, and Sarah's skill set of being very good with the discovery and very good with the strategy side of things, and I take care of more of the visual side. So our skill sets complement each other really well. So over the last 7.5 years, we've been working with lots of different types of clients, from like tiny little businesses to big tech companies, and it's been fun so far.
So I'm kind of curious. So just for historical speaking for everyone, so it's been many years since we've worked together. Early this calendar, actually last calendar year, I went through a point of unemployment, right, or a period of unemployment, and so I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And from that time of self-discovery, this podcast idea was born, right? And I'm kind of curious, before I even got it off the ground, what is it that you saw that made you want to get involved? Because I can tell you guys, I was really struggling with that final 10% of getting this thing off the ground. And your involvement was so impactful that I hit the reset button on that intended launch date. So can you just tell me a little bit about like why you decided to work with me, and like what did you see that you thought you could provide some help and value?
Well, obviously, like you said, we worked together at your previous agency, and we collaborated on quite cool branding projects there, and always enjoyed working with you, and the collaboration was always good. So when, like, obviously we've linked on LinkedIn, and I think it comes back to that thing of being almost like open with the process a little bit, which I think designers are well known for kind of keeping everything buried down. But when you are open with the community and you share your struggles, and it's not just all a big show reel, you kind of open up the conversation for other people to come in. And I think as designers, sometimes for me, when something like with John and Jane, as soon as John and Jane had a logo, it kind of felt real then.
Mm-hmm.
So when you kind of shared a video, I think it was a video or a post talking about your process, you've got this idea for the podcast, you've got these set of colors that you want to work with, but you felt like the typography wasn't quite right. And straight away, I could see how we could potentially help you. And the idea of collaborating again was obviously very appealing. So I reached out, and yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, I think like we chatted about it internally as we sort of saw your story sort of progress really. And I think, like Gareth said, he obviously straight away had ideas visually about how we could potentially help you all provide some sort of assets, because that's obviously what you were sort of talking about and looking for. And then also we just had a lot of time for what you were doing. We loved the fact that you were, like Gareth said, being very open and transparent. And I think it, as you mentioned multiple times on your podcast, job market can be pretty scary and quite isolating, quite cold. And I think, over the years, we've sort of always been really interested in that community side of sharing that kind of genuine experience, because let's be honest, there's a lot of kind of gloss, and getting underneath that I think can be so helpful for other people, and really rewarding and helpful for ourselves, let's be honest, like sharing that genuine experience. So I think from a copy and a messaging perspective as well, it was like not easy, but we were kind of really feeling it. So we had some ideas, and then we thought, well, maybe we could collaborate and help in some way.
Yeah. So what you're referring to was, during that time, I'd released a video, talking about what I'm struggling with. And there was a video specifically where I had reached out to the community and be like, hey, look, if you guys need any help during this period where we're all searching for jobs, like hit me up as a sounding board. And that turned into some insights I discovered at that time where people were just struggling on reinventing themselves or seeing if their skills can transition to other fields because they were not getting anything out there on the job market. And so, yeah, I think you're right. The authenticity to tone and how that is a baseline for brand and building credibility is really important. And I'm kind of curious for in your guys' point of view, like what makes a good brand? And we didn't talk to how that applied to the work we did together, but in general, like what are you typically looking for? What is that process where you are able to evaluate maybe someone's brand presence or just whatever those elements are? And then what steps do you take to kind of start putting some maybe a process or workflow around kind of getting that to a better place?
Yeah, brand is a funny one, really. I think if you asked 100 people what branding is, you'd probably get dozens of different answers. And it's a quote that we love and we refer to when we're doing workshops all the time. And with branding, there's only one thing that matters, and that's everything. And it's kind of true. It's like a brand can go and spend a fortune building an amazing visual brand, an amazing service, and that can all be torn down with like one bad bit of customer service potentially.
Yeah.
And that could change the whole brand in that one person's mind immediately. So I think when we're working with brands and we're trying to discover like brands that we want to work with, brands that we want to help, it comes down to, I think a lot of the time, is purpose. What are they trying to do? Is there a real goal at the heart of it? Is there a concept that we can kind of lean to? Is there a story we can cling on to?
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of going towards the sort of USP, and that's obviously part of the discovery process, is always trying to figure that out, whether it's one person or a large organizational business. And I think that's a really key thing. But I think that saying we like, it kind of does work across the board, because even speaking like in terms of design and like the visual offering, every single little thing matters. Obviously, the type choice, affects everything. The color affects everything. Feeling, represents a million things. And I think the same could be said in terms of discovery and that process that you mentioned, because, when that's what we can obviously do every day, and looking at a person or a group or a large organization, we feel like, our jobs is distilling that down into that kind of real essence of what they're, not only what their purpose is, but I think also what they do and who they are, because we have that second snapshot, and that's what branding helps us do, is to communicate in just a couple of seconds what you're all about. So we see that as our job, really, and it is literally starting really, really wide and just distilling down to that.
And I think that's the going back to that video you put out. I think one of the reasons, well, there's a few reasons we wanted to kind of reach out and help where we possibly could, was obviously the past collaboration, but also it was that sense of community. It was that sense that you found yourself in that spot where you were looking to then make connections and help others as well. And it kind of reminds me of, or remind both of us a little bit of Creative Mornings. It's a global event, but Sarah actually started the Cardiff chapter about 10 years ago. And it was all about just bringing people together and idea sharing and giving back to the community, really. And yeah, so community has always been an important thing for us.
Yeah, and yeah, quite often that will come into brand, and as you know, that's a huge thing now. Even if you're selling a product or clothes or anything, or online platforms, it's that community and building community has gotten more and more important and more kind of prevalent, hasn't it? That speak and storytelling, all those sorts of things. And I think they've always been there, but I just think that we're getting more and more sort of explicit terms for things, because the branding world is maturing almost. This service and these roles that we all have, which, to be honest, for a while nobody really knew what these specialisms were called, but of course they're kind of starting to come clear now, and those processes are starting to become a bit more recognizable, and standardized, really, and people aren't so surprised anymore if you do speak about a discovery session or that part of the branding process, rather than just having a logo, for example. People are a lot more au fait with that process and understand that there's a bit more to it than that.
Yeah, it's interesting. your comment about distilling things down to a core that's easily understandable is really important because that's where I struggled in the beginning. So like I have this idea in my head of what I want this thing to be, but I couldn't put words to it, right? And I remember in our first discovery session, you guys are real quick. You guys asked so many good questions, ranging from my vision, my purpose, my mission, and what I'm trying to do with this. What kind of takeaways do you want my audience to be getting from these videos, both from an emotional point of view as well as professional? And you took all of that and you distilled it down to a single problem or mission statement that characterized exactly what was going on between my ears. And that was so helpful. I think a lot of companies, they actually the larger the company, the more personalities you have there and a lot of influence onto what messaging is. The problem is then that you have so many perspectives, it's hard to boil it down to one single statement that can then be the foundation to build a brand. And it was cool to see that happen firsthand, and you totally got it. And I posted that on LinkedIn because I was so excited about it, and it got a lot of reaction, and people are like, "Oh, that's so cool," and like now I totally get it. Um, and the other way I've operationalized that is when I bring in additional guests, I have like a letter that's sent out, and that's made its way into the letter because it's articulating what I'm thinking in my vision and getting alignment. And I'm kind of curious, you guys, because there's setting the message or the messaging, and then there's taking that and then applying, let's say, visual or stylings to it through like you guys went through like a mood board exercise. And um, up to that point, all I knew was that I guess the keywords that were important to me was like authenticity, professionalism, and then like relatability and transparency slash genuine, right? And the only work I'd done after that point was thinking through colors. And so the color I had kind of doubled down on was like blue, right? If anyone in the B2B is wondering like why everyone uses blue, like why did Dell use blue? Why did IBM use blue? And like LinkedIn uses blue? It's because blue represents confidence, right? And credibility. And that's why those companies use it. And the so I decided I wanted blue, although I was testing between blue and purple because I didn't know. And the other color I wanted was orange, only because if you look at the color wheel, they're opposite ends of the spectrum, so they contrast really well. And as a web marketer, I know that when it comes to like user engagement on websites, like a orange accent over blue tests really, really well. Right, a lot of click through, but that's literally it. I struggled with the icon, the logo. It looked very cartoony in the beginning. So I was looking at all the other podcasts out there. They look really fun and whatnot. So I tried to emulate that, but just nothing was hitting the mark. So can you break down your process? Like when you saw that, what was your reaction? Was it positive or negative? And what kind of led you down the path of where you end up leading the design direction?
When we the question is when we first saw like what you had put together.
Yeah, like what was your like? Was it like an adverse reaction, or we're like, okay, now we knew we know where we need to take this thing?
Well, I think I think it's potential. I think we saw potential. I think in what you told us and what you were actually doing, there was so much potential to the project. But I think a lot of the basics were there. I think the color palette it was really strong, and I think just kind of like just tinkering with that a little bit, and just all those things we learned, authentic, friendly. I think your personality has to come across. That you are the personality of the podcast.
And it's obvious that you've had experience within and around branding as you have over the years. So I think you bring that information to this process as well, which is really helpful. It means actually you were 10 steps ahead of perhaps where somebody who hasn't had that experience is. So that's always helpful. Yeah, you might feel like maybe the end product needs some, a bit more work, but I mean that you're still 10 steps ahead. So I think for us, any input like that is always helpful.
But I think your like ideas around color theory as well were like well informed. Just like you've got blue, which is a very trusted, very corporate color, and you are talking about corporate jobs a lot of the time. But then you've got that orange, which is a much in terms of color theory, it's a happy, positive, creative color, and you're bringing all that to this as well. So And again, like you said, they are opposite ends of the spectrum. They contrast really well. And I just think through doing like you've done a lot of digital marketing, and web stuff, and just A/B testing. We've done a lot of that over the years as well. And it's so interesting. You put something at blue and then you put something at orange, and it just outperforms. And I guess it just must be something to do with that color that just attracts people a little bit more. But then when you've got both of them, you can kind of dial up and dial down, and you can use both colors. So I think when we saw it, it was like it all made a lot of sense, but we just thought with the right typography, tweaking of the colors, and identity, that I think you had a strong idea for the identity as well, which we kind of just helped nurture a little bit.
We also had some great photographs, which is massively helpful. You know, that they felt like you, they felt like talking to you, as it were, and your personality came through.
And that's a big part of it. I think we asked you to go and take these photographs, and we just said, have fun with it, get your personality across. And you didn't hold back. It's like it's quite a difficult thing to do, isn't it? But you, like, obviously starting off, it's not like a big professional photo shoot or anything. But the photos you've got, I think I was looking at the podcast on Apple Podcasts the other day, and it just makes me so happy just seeing the cover and all the episodes there. I think you've done a great job.
That was such a painful exercise because I am not photogenic at all. So it took me a long time to get to something where I was like, oh, this is probably worth sending to them. And like going through all my blinks, you know, and like the weird awkward, like it's like Talladega Nights was like Ricky Bobby has like his hands. I was like, I don't know what to do with my hands. You know, it's pretty much that, but like in picture form. So can you walk us through maybe like the practical steps? You know, you mentioned things like having a strong perspective on your approach to typography or colors, or how you turn that into a digital expression or whatever that looks like, right? What do you go like? What's your thinking process as you're choosing these? Like maybe walk us through how you think about fonts, you know, or colors, or any of those elements that build up to your ultimate, you know, your strategy or visuals.
Well, I think, like, especially with, you know, using yourself as an example, I think that discovery and all that sort of conversation and figuring out kind of what your manifesto is, I think that's the really sort of magical part of branding that we really enjoy working on together, isn't it? Because I think we collate all that information together, you know, but then there is that crossover point where maybe it's all up on the wall, or the words, and then of course it's translating that, as you say, into these sort of deliverables. But you know, in your case, you know, the type is kind of blurry. Nothing's too sharp, nothing's too shiny, which is a direct sort of reference and translation to our messaging, which is, you know, life's not a straight line. You know, your job kind of career can be a mess, and that's okay. You know, humans are messy. And so, you know, it's just bringing those sort of conceptual parts to it as well. But and that's kind of where I feel like then, of course, you formalize the type choices, the color choices, and translate that into a design style.
It's obviously, when it comes to typography and colors, it's all very subjective design. But I think that's one thing that why I love working with Sarah so much. She's so good at like drawing all that information out in a way that makes sense, and just being part of those workshops, whether it's like a workshop with yourself, which is obviously a very small business, or where we have to go and do multiple workshops across multiple departments, across multiple cities. It's the process, and I think we've got that process that we know and trust. When Sarah gives me that information, it is about then kind of making the right choices. What typeface is going to reflect your personality or the brand's personality in its best possible way? And like Sarah said, we've got like a core wall here, and when we're working, we might put stuff up. Or what I tend to do is I sometimes like save logos or save typefaces to my screensaver of my phone. I'll just look at it for the next couple of days, just let it like sink in.
Living with it.
I think just living with it, and then you go, oh, maybe that's not quite right, and you move on, and until you make a final decision. And just like we presented your brand, we always present just one concept, because we've gone through all these motions, like trying dozens of typefaces out, trying to find that right typeface that represents the brand in the way that we feel works best. So when we present, we present confidently just that one concept, because I think if you present like three concepts, sometimes it can like confuse the client. They can say, oh, we like 1, 2, and maybe a little bit of 3, and then you start having like a watered down kind of brand. So I think it's our process to like sit with it, live with it, and then just confidently present what we believe is the best solution for that brand.
I didn't know that, and that's That's fascinating. When I was on the design, the agency side of the world, like earlier in my career, I did what you just suggested at the end, which is like, let's provide something that's a design concept that's like out of the world, kind of crazy, borderline can't execute, one super conservative, and something conservative or maybe medium that they would most
Yeah.
likely land on, and you hope that they pick elements of the others and kind of bring it to the middle. But you're talking about going in like guns blazing with double downing
Yeah.
on one single concept, which I think is really, really brave. You know, can you share some examples of maybe a client where like that worked really, really well and just took off, or maybe some examples where like that did not fly, and what did
Yeah.
that look like?
The good thing is, it's a process that is like we've developed. I think I've worked with past agencies where the three or four
Yeah.
concept
Yeah.
approach was the way. And what we always found as an internal team would be like, we like that concept. We hope they go with that concept. That's the best concept. And maybe they'd go with another concept, or they would go with, and sometimes like a mashup of two concepts or three concepts. So I think it was something I tried years ago when I was just doing a little bit of freelancing on the side of my 9 to 5 job, and it went so well, and it just made a lot of sense to me. So we've been doing it since we started John and Jane, and touch wood, I would say probably like 9 times out of 10 the client signs off that first approach.
I don't think
Mm.
it's necessarily the easiest thing to do, because I think when we, that's not to complain about it. I think that's why we do it. But to have that one solo sort of execution, I think our job then is to completely sell that and explain every sort of reason and rationale why it is like that. And to be honest, usually, well, that's the job, is to make that impressive enough and as sort of rational enough that actually people feel really heard, people feel really seen. And then actually when you present the solution, they feel actually, yes, you've really like looked after, because brand is people's babies, essentially. It is an expression of them. We appreciate that's a huge responsibility. So we just try and honor that really, and really kind of, and essentially that is selling it, isn't it, back, which we, that process is quite magical, I think, because if people are really impressed and excited, then that's our job done. Then that's what
We do have one client who she's moved jobs about 3 times in the last 5 years or so. And whenever she moves jobs, she brings us in to rebrand the company. And she refers to it as like having a baby. So she was like, I'm ready to have another baby. And it's like, that's how she emails us now when she's like got into a new job or something like that. So it's obviously people do care, and we care about it a hell of a lot as well. And just making sure we do a good job. But the good thing is as well that with that approach, it's not it can be seen as quite risky, but like I said, we've probably got a dozen concepts in the background anyway. So if they don't like that one concept, which we would be confident that they would feel it was right, we can say, give us a couple of days. We've got a bunch of other concepts, and we can put something else together fairly quickly as well, because they are there. So we've got those concepts with the one side.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering, Tim, about yourself. So obviously you've been sort of agency side, you've been kind of lots of sides actually, watching the branding process and watching campaigns launch and web design. Like, did it feel different having sort of creating a brand around yourself rather than sort of with other businesses?
It was very, very different, and a very enjoyable process and very, very scary. Um, when you guys are selling me the pitch, the vision was really cool. Your pitch included this. You did the vision statement. Um, you showed exposition on color. Um, you explored the concept of a black and white or grayscale photo approach, which I'd never previously considered. Um, you showed different elements of the background that goes like right now everyone sees there's the blue and the orange slides in, but like it looks like now where we landed, it looks like a text, like a speech text bubble, whatever. Oops, I hit my microphone. But you gave me like multiple examples of what that would look like, and there's ones where it was like a fade or a blur, and there's the typefaces, like you're talking about, like things are confident, yet there's a lot of things are unsettled. And you showed typefaces that kind of broke apart towards the end. Like kind of things kind of faded. And then you showed the logos on hats, a poster, all these like these tangible things, and made it feel very real. And that was the first time I was like, oh, like this can actually be like a real thing. Like seeing it out in the wild. I haven't done the hat thing yet. It's on my list. Um, but that was really, really cool. And that really hit home for me. And it made me, and now the baby, that is the brand, it feels like it's something that can actually happen. And that's what got me over that last hump where I knew I was like, you know what, this is totally worth doing a reset. It was totally worth a potential awkward conversation where I already had a designer and you're coming in and essentially undoing all of it. But it was worth it. So that's kind of like what I was processing at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not always easy, is it? And that goes to show, even just, on your own, doing your own podcast, there's always sort of some politics to deal with. And I feel like that's a huge part of the discovery phase of a rebrand or a new brand as well. It's always emotional. It's always, because even if it's a sort of established brand and you're going to change it, that's really tricky because people love the old brand or maybe love some part of the old brand. It just doesn't feel right to change it. So you're up against that, So there's always a lot of politics or kind of, yeah. I think that the discovery phase can help with that though, because it can really help everyone to put their view forward and have some part in shaping it. And that helps people adopt it then, of course, and love it and think of it as their own. So it's turning those challenges around, I think. And I appreciate that's tricky when, you maybe done design work, but we obviously have to often work with other designers and perhaps feed into that, maybe suggest changes as they do with us. So, it's not like, you have to be able to take that kind of to and fro. That's collaboration.
It's not personal. It's like, I think that's something that
Yeah.
all designers need to learn, isn't it? It's like, because you do get quite attached to your work, and when someone has constructive feedback, it's not personal. And obviously we all just want the best outcome for any project.
Yeah. So can we shift the conversation a little bit about just the industry or career path that is everything to do with brand? Like, can you just help me understand like your path and journey to here, right? Because most of the designers I work with are your design creatives, UI, UX type. The skill set for brand is a little different because there's a lot of strategy around that, and I'm assuming a lot of that has to come with personal experience to be able to have a conversation on brand because there's a lot of things that go beyond that, right? You're looking at personas, you're looking at your audience. There's so much more to it. Can you help me understand like your career path? Like what led you here? And like what made you decide to go this branch specifically of creative?
I think like we just touched upon earlier, I think this industry has kind of grown up quite a lot in the last, I'd say it's been 15 years I've probably been working in that. Previous to that, after university, I ended up kind of working in logistics just because that was the job I could get at the time. But actually I really am a strong believer in transferable skills. And I think any job you have, you can glean and learn a lot if you have the kind of right mindset and take that on to many other roles in the future. And I think in terms of kind of studio management and project planning and things like that, logistics is great grounding. So that's unknowingly really helped. But yeah, I think in the last 15 years, our industry has kind of developed and like we said, there's roles there and there's processes there that have kind of really started to take shape. So yeah.
So yeah, your journey has been kind of like you went into logistics. Sarah started a sandwich shop when she was like 19, and then she's like kind of went into a digital agency, and you've ended up in design and branding. But mine was a lot more linear. Like I think at about the age of about 12, I did a logo for my friend's mum, and I said I wanted to be a graphic designer. I wasn't sure what a graphic designer was, but I just wanted to be a graphic designer. So I like drawing, I like being on a computer. So those two skills felt like they went together quite well. So I studied art and IT and went off to university, studied graphic design and became a graphic designer. I worked at a couple of studios and ended up here. But I think it was the thing that kind of when we first started working together was with Creative Mornings.
Yeah. I think as well, for me, it all started around content. So I did my degree, but then I studied again and I kind of refocused in on literature and writing. I love that side of things. So, and then I kind of started working in the design industry. And I think for me, it's been really interesting to see how that kind of content and strategy piece has become more of a part an official part and an accepted part of branding, and that kind of bringing meaning and reason for things and design decisions, because I do think that's where that power comes from with branding. And when you see really good branding, that's what it's all about. So yeah, watching that kind of develop has been really interesting. And I've worked in content and marketing. And again, I think I was watching one of your other podcasts where you were speaking to someone. It's like, is specialism better or generalism? And I think, these roles have been crossing over for years, and yeah, so my line hasn't been quite so straight, despite being around kind of design and web design and publishing for a really long time. But I think they do all feed into this process.
And I think that writing element, like you said, the manifesto or the kind of the overarching, just it's a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, but it distills that brand down. Whenever Sarah writes that for a branding presentation, it always gets me excited, and I always insist that Sarah reads it out. I do think it is so powerful to set up. I think when a big logo gets released in the media, one over here a little while back was the Olympics in 2012. They put it in the newspaper and it just got slated. Because I think when people don't understand the story behind it, the initial reaction is people don't like change. If Facebook changes its interface, nobody likes it. But if through that presentation, through that brand presentation that we gave to you, and we always give to any brand that we've been working with, once you kind of share that story and you share that message and you share that kind of process where you got to that logo, it's almost like letting people in on the joke, and then they get it, and I think it goes down so much better, and people just have a better understanding.
Yeah, I don't see it. I do. I think you're right. It's letting people in on that for sure, and being almost completely transparent in our thinking. But I think as well as that, for me, and it's just been practice. And I still, like any creative thing, I'm sure you think every time, you don't always start a project going, oh my God, I'm going to nail this straight away. You always think, oh, this is hard, but that's obviously the challenge of it. But it's just practice, constantly looking and trying to glean. And what I feel like is not letting people in the joke, it's reflecting back as much as what they've shared with you as possible, and then making something really beautiful and useful off the back of that, really. So it's like a reflect. I see that's what my job is, just to reflect back, really, and puts it into some sort of sense for people to.
It must be really interesting from your end, kind of obviously if you've got a brand, then you've got to then translate that for product, you've got to translate it for web. There's so many, once you've got that central hub of a brand, there's so many areas for it to kind of, so many channels for it to go off on.
Yeah,
I mean that.
So it's, if I look like my current job, and actually the previous three, I would say it would be similar, where the brand has been set, meaning there is a palette, there's the brand guidelines that they have all been set. And in all three instances, I feel like the way the web reflects that brand was very limited. So at Rubrik, for example, they had a really strong brand presence. The website just didn't do it justice. So in that instance, we were able to do a complete redesign. Not everyone has the luxury of doing a complete replatform. The company after that at A10 Networks, that one, the brand felt a little more old school. And that's where I was like, we didn't have budget to do a complete replatform or redesign. And so the question was, what incremental changes can I make on the website to make it feel more relevant in a way that I feel like it should be, that would engage audiences without it being a redesign or rehaul, right? And so that's looking at hero banners and how can I maybe change that? Or when I'm looking at, the first thing I changed was the icon language. It's like hard edges to round edges, solid fill versus non, right? And the challenge with that one was not having the budget to execute at scale. You have some mixes and matches of contrasting styles, but it was moving towards where I want to go. And my current company, like Fortinet, we've got a great brand. And the challenge from the website was the execution of it was a little limited. And that is an example where a website for a company our size, you have to design with scale in mind from the get-go. And that leads itself to things like templates. Well, the challenge is if you go into it thinking templatization and without a full view into the user experience. Again, I wasn't there when the decisions were made. They're just me reflecting on what I see and what I have to work with. I feel the brand expression is limited. And so you see the full range of colors that is in our brand doesn't exist on .com. We see the primary colors, you see some of the secondary, but the tertiary hardly exists, and all the wonderful accent colors that are in the secondary palette just aren't there. And so I think my my challenge now is how do I take what I believe to be an incremental approach and surgically go in and change things categorically. And so I'm doing an exposition on all hero banners, and when it's done, it needs to roll out overnight. And so and then same thing with icons. Like once I do it, it's great, but now you have like thousands of pages. And then all of those, and the icon library for web is a lot more expansive than typically what comms uses. And so the work to recreate is pretty significant. So like those are things I'm looking at, and we're making some changes. And I'm a data nerd, so I'm testing things all the darn time. And thankfully the brand elements that we're testing in conjunction with different UI and UX layouts, it's resulting in much higher conversion. So that the challenge now is rolling that out at scale. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. I'm hoping that just as a marketing person, like with the next year to two, I would love to see us do a brand update or refresh, not moving too far from the center of who we are, but maybe just giving some more flexibility. And I remember when I was at Rubrik, when we did that redesign, the first exercise was um, a an exploration on who we were as an archetype for the company. Are we a renegade company still? Are we a thought leader, right? Are we the friendly type? Like there's all those archetypes. And once you land on that, then we realize, oh shoot, as a brand for Rubrik, like in the beginning, they were renegades. They came out guns a-blazing and they're doing all these crazy fun things. But now it's like when I joined the company, it's like they're like a multi-million-dollar company, and like now they have customers, and they can't go as intentionally crazy, even though like John, the VP of marketing, he had a brilliant creative mind. But then like now it's like the archetype for the company, it's a little different now, right? And now you're a leader, and you as a leader get expressing, and that kind of you guys actually came in around the same time because we did that redesign. We also did Rubrik Forward. You guys were hugely involved in like redesigning that whole look and approach, which is really, really cool to see your impact on that. And I actually borrowed some of that for the website as well. But yeah, that's just kind of like where I am on the client side. It just how do we do more with less in today's market, but also elevate the brand at the same time?
It sounds like a wise move, to be honest, because like all brands, they've got to keep evolving, and the business evolves, and especially with businesses like Rubrik, it's so fast, isn't it? Like there is
fast and fast. Like a lot, and it's moving really quickly.
And things do change. You go from this like quirky little startup to we one of our bigger clients over the last few years, we did so much work with them. They had their IPO and everything changed. It was like they took everything in house, everything had to be safer. And I suppose I get it. They've got new goals, they've got new objectives to
new limitations.
And with that comes new limitations. But I think what you're doing there with kind of just evolving the little things and especially on the web, testing them is
that's the tricky thing, isn't it? It's like keep making, maturing like that and being very careful in a way, but also keeping that heart and that sort of core of who you are and at least communicating some personality, because if you're not careful, you can lose some of that personality, can't you? If you're getting that big and things getting really standardized, it's quite hard, I think, to keep that personalization there.
But then you see some companies really lean into it, and then, like you think of Salesforce and Einstein and all the little characters they've got. They lean in and people obviously love it, and it's obviously very successful for them. So yeah, I suppose it's always decisions to be made, and you kind of start your brand, you launch, but at every year, every couple of months, there's avenues. So you can go down there, or you can go safer, or you can go down the adventurous route. So brands are always going to keep moving and evolving. So
Yeah, like Rubrik is fascinating. So like Oded Kilmer, so he's like the VP of design of product. I still, keep in touch with him. And when I joined Rubrik, one of their decisions was, hey, like from a branding point of view, we want our product to stand out. And so when you look at like a server rack, you see black, 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 and you see white. Like white is
Yeah.
Rubrik's, right? Actually, funny enough, Fortinet's product is also white, our FortiGates, which is fantastic. So but what they realized was, people are sitting in front of these screens, like the terminals every day. And when you walk by the terminal, you don't know what product it is because they all look the same, right? The UI interface. And so Oded came in and he was like, when someone walks by this terminal, I want that software experience to be distinctly Rubrik. And I remember in the very beginning, like he pulled me into the process, which was really fun. I was like, oh, I felt like honored, right? Um, and
That's
we
so
went,
fun.
yeah, we went through a mood board exercise and everything, and putting a color. And his takeaway was they made a decision that they wanted the product experience to feel distinctly consumer, which is a
Mm.
huge departure from what most people see. Um, so that was really, really cool. And so now like
Yeah.
it changed their color palette, the usage of transparency versus not, and their icon choices, and then also taking accessibility into consideration. And you're looking at these screens for 8 to 10 hours a day. So you can't have colors that are too bright because it burns the brain. So I think that's a good example. Like you're taking your brand and you're executing it all the way down to product, where sometimes like the brand feels like a marketing thing and
Yeah.
it can be disjointed from product. And it was really cool seeing them do that. I would actually love to see that in my current company. And I think most companies in my B2B companies would probably agree with that, right? Like you see all this cool stuff in marketing. How
Yeah.
do we make the brand experience similar?
Exactly. That's the ideal. That's the aim, isn't it? Is that
Yeah.
kind of coherency really from every touch point, like you said, whether it be customer service to kind of the actual product itself, the online presence, your social, your tone of voice. I mean, that's the aim, isn't it? But this, like you say, is always changing. There's no such thing as perfect. So I think it's just all aiming for that really is the only way forward. Otherwise it's terrifying and petrified. You can't, perfection doesn't exist.
So do you have any advice for someone who is maybe they're already they're a digital design or anything in the field? What would they need to think about to break into this industry more, or maybe catapult themselves? Like, is there any advice you would give to somebody?
I think from a designer's point of view, if you're a young designer, a student or a graduate or someone who's just looking to change their career completely, um, I think similar to what you did, I think share your work. I think the more you put out there, the more comes back. Because if you're silent, then there's nothing for people to respond to. So
Hmm.
I think putting your work out there, even if at the beginning, like you're not thinking this is not strong enough. And I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome in the creative industry anyway, and people think this isn't good enough. And you're almost comparing. There's a quote from Gavin Stranger's book, isn't it? It's like, don't compare your behind the scenes with other people's show reels. And
Hmm.
I always kind of think about that a little bit. Like you see these perfectly curated kind of case studies and things, but share the process, share your work, try and get out and meet fellow creatives at in-person events, and don't be afraid to reach out to people as well. Because when people email us asking for advice, I think it is difficult to get back to lots of students and lots of people. But we always try and get back with at least some help, or maybe meet them for a coffee and try and offer some feedback.
Yeah, and I think from something we've learned over the years as well is maybe if you are currently working as a designer or content strategist or a copywriter, what have you. I think sometimes you can be drawn to these sort of creative events and you meet fellow creatives, which is really lovely and really important. But I think something we've learned almost by accident really over the years is if you're maybe interested in one sort of industry or one cause or what have you, I think there's something to be said for immersing yourself in that and actually learning about that, and maybe offering some help in that
Hmm.
area. So for me, that was creative mornings, because I love seeing creatives kind of have room to play and create things and share that experience. But maybe if it was, for example, we've done work with sort of housing associations where it's a really quite gratifying work, because you're kind of helping build community and provide solutions for people. And just thinking about it from an industry perspective, rather than thinking, right, I want to do copywriting. It's like, what do you want to write about? And also, how can you make yourself useful? Because I think those then lead to maybe case studies that are really quite powerful, and you get more work perhaps in that area as well.
I do think, yeah, if you put out tech work, there's probably going to be tech companies that get in touch with you. If you put out food and drink brands, it's going to, so even if, like, I think in the beginning, what a lot of people do is they build fictional brands to build a portfolio. So it's put out what you want to come back. I always remember when I was young, I think I was still a student, I did a drawing of Bob Dylan with like this super wavy curly hair, kind of inspired by the Milton Glaser kind of style a little bit. And I posted it, and I think I had about 4 inquiries from like corporate companies asking me to draw their C-suite in that style. I ended up doing a children's book, illustrating a children's book in that style. And it's great. Like it was just a very quick doodle of Bob Dylan that I put on Instagram, I think it was. And yes, so just surprising what comes back when you put stuff out there.
It's a really good example, actually, because I think as well, like thinking about different industry, but also think about styles. So maybe if you do want to work in a certain style, or write a certain, put it out there, it comes back. Yeah, I think so. That's one thing I think we always try and do, like, working with Rubrik and other tech companies. I think sometimes you can go in thinking this is what they want, the prescribed sort of look and feel of a tech company. But I think what can be so satisfying for everybody involved is to actually do something completely different, especially if it's a campaign. So you've got a bit of artistic freedom and just bring something that you think would not fit in the tech space, can just make those campaigns stand out.
Because if you do a Google search for cybersecurity and go to Google Images, the things that will come up will be very dark images with flashing, long exposure blue lights. Like there'll be cables, there'll be kind of there'll probably be like people in hoodies looking like hats and things like that. Whereas I think our approach to Rubrik has been some of the Rubrik projects we've done have just been crazy, really. I think we worked on with you on the Forward brand, where we kind of had that like kind of arty kind of like rig of like buildings in Chicago. But we've recently just done a campaign with Rubrik, which they came to us, and it's illustrations all around characters that are kind of loosely based on Lord of the Rings characters, and they're like drawn in this really kind of like graphic-y kind of style, and it's so far removed from what you would expect from cybersecurity. So I think when we first set up John and Jane, about 6 months in, we had a couple of staff at the time, and we sat down and we did a workshop for ourselves. And what came out of it was our mission was to do something different. So when we get a project, look around what the industry is currently doing and what's like expected in that industry, and try and take it in a completely different direction. Which I think that's when a company gets out of their comfort zone. That's when you get out of your comfort zone and you can experiment and try new things. And I think that's when the most interesting things happen as well from a creative point of view.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think to add on top of that great advice, I think my takeaway is, as a creative, if you discover an industry or an area that you're passionate about, allow yourself to pour into it, and then showcase that work, right? And hopefully that work is showcased in a way that shows kind of the diversity of skill sets, because obviously that's what's going to get the attention first. Yeah. I think when it comes to the interview process, or actually even utilizing social, the part that I don't think it's talked about enough, which is like when I'm making a hire for design creatives, I like how Zoom just did a thumbs up there. I don't know who in product chose to do that. So the process of how you align or arrive at the end, it becomes really, really important, right? Because there's a difference between someone who just gets instruction and just output something, and the output can be fantastic or misses the mark. But if they understand your process on how you receive a instruction, and then you turn that into something like the questions that you're asking, the things you're deliberating over as you approach to the final design, that is really, really important. It's a difference between an end result that is a very solid and bold in color, or something that looks really flashy and trendy, or something very conservative. Like understanding how you make decisions to arrive there. And their interview process helps them understand if you're going to join the company, you're going to provide a little more perspective before the end result, right? And I think that's something that, in a world of social, I wish people would do more of that. Like here's the behind the scenes on how I approached this project or problem, or here's where we started and we entered something very, very different, and here's why, right? Or even like breaking down, like, hey, if it's a exercise in type font, even helping people understanding the thickness versus the thinness of a font, or how smooth or how hard it is, and how that ties into a decision on brand. Helping people understand that is really, really important. And I think with things like LinkedIn, where there's like video mediums to do that. And again, if you're trying to get yourself out there, don't limit yourself to just the work you produced. I think the
Yeah.
the method is really, really important.
Yeah. And sometimes it is
Yeah.
it is sometimes just getting out there as well, isn't it? And if you're looking at your own brand, for example, and you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, some of the biggest social media companies like Twitter, if you look, even Apple, if you look back at their original logo, it's like unrecognizable to where they, because like we said, brands have to evolve. And
Yeah.
I think putting yourself out there it does take a bit of bravery and a bit of vulnerability as well. But I think it's worth it.
Cool. Sarah, Gareth, it was great having you on. It was really enjoyable conversation. But hoping you can come back again. We need to talk about your passion on t-shirts for soccer or football. But
Oh, don't get me started on football shirts.
yeah. No, actually, I have one last fun question I was asking you. I intentionally didn't prepare you for this because I'm just kind of curious. So you mentioned earlier you're a small company, but you're working with your spouse or partner. What is that like? Because like when I have a hard day at work, I try not to take that home with me. But you guys are living it together, right? Like, so what does that look like?
I think we literally share your bemusement about it, because we never started this 7 years ago thinking, oh yeah, we'll be doing this for a good 10 years now. Well, let's do it as long as we can do it, and then like chill out and not do that and go and get a job somewhere else, because obviously those boundaries are really, really important. So I'd say that's obviously where it's tricky, because obviously a lot of us bring our work home at night, but obviously because we're both across all the work, it's really easy to just talk about work all the time. But I think, on the other hand, on the plus side, that there is that kind of working relationship that has been developed over, nearly a decade. So it's when we do present and when projects do go really well, and that can be really, really sort of lovely thing to share, actually, can't it?
Yeah, it's like I think just like in work, when you have a big win, it's a big win as well. But I do think there has to be a line. We often refer to ourselves in third person. I mean, it's like we call it Gareth and Sarah and John and Jane. And it's like in a jokey way. But I think we have to like make sure we kind of get that separation there. And I think there's certainly things that help. Like we've got a dog, and we take the dog for a big walk every single day. And just making sure you do the basic things as well, like go and do some exercise and do your yoga and things like that.
Yeah, I think like with colleagues, it's really, really key, isn't it? That you do have maybe some honest conversations sometimes. But I think perhaps working in this scenario, I think you have to do that by times 100. You have to be honest, and you have to because it is otherwise can be quite intense. There's no point, and you can't just let things build up, because there's work to do. So you've got to kind of keep on top of that, and yeah, I think
it is a tricky one, and I think a lot of people, like friends and family, they're all kind of like, how do you do it? But I don't know.
It's that nature as well. I think because my daughter, like with Creative Mornings, we work together there. There'll be family members coming in to help, and actually we really enjoy that. I know they say never work with your family or your friends even, but actually in our experience, that's always been really, really nice, isn't it?
So far.
Yeah, but, when brothers come in and children, and
Yeah.
everyone has something to offer, don't they? And I think those people that are closest to you, you experience, I'm sure, like when you share your work things and your problems, they've got that unique take on it because they know you so well. So yeah, they can be helpful.
Do you think you could do it, Tim?
Oh man, it's tough. I probably could. My wife is pretty fantastic, and I think knowing when to relinquish a control or a decision, and I think being able to have humility and swallow pride where it's needed, and pick and choose when you need to really argue for a point of view versus knowing when to let something go would probably be the hardest part. Especially if you're each individually really strong in your points of view. Someone has to give and take. But I think the part about walking a dog, like having a break point, and then like work is now over. Now we're we're no longer John and Jane. We're Susan and Gareth, right?
I tell actually one straight line we do have that's really clear and has always been the case is when it goes to creative and the visuals, you have final say. And when it comes to maybe a strap line or the messaging, I have final say. So there is a line in the middle. So it's like so it's like we can obviously feed into it, both of us, but the decision, if we are umming and ahhing, is yours or mine in those places.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's good. You need to agree on how the tiebreaker is going to happen, right? So
I think it would be way more difficult if we were both designers. I think when I was in university, I thought one day I'll start my own business with one of my designer friends. I think that would be hell. Like just two designers with like strong opinions, kind of trying to figure something out. At least Sarah and I, our skill sets complement one another. It's really nice, other than the same skill set going head to head.
So whoever's listening, you guys need some help for branding or having a digital agency, like I totally recommend John and Jane. How can they find you guys? Your website or what have you?
Yeah, the best place to find us would be johnandjane.agency, and we're probably most active on Instagram and LinkedIn are the two kind of platforms that I think you've got to pick your battles when you're small. So I think they're the two that we've got our social platforms.
And Instagram, is it also just John and Jane? Or
it's actually because our logo kind of looks like an 8. We couldn't get John and Jane, so it's actually both of them. I think it is John and then the number 8, Jane.
John and Jane, cool. All right, well, thanks guys for being on the episode, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much for having us, Tim.
Thanks so much, Tim. Cheers.